Art is an allegory of human psyche. Art is an artificial way to recreate all what makes our beings, yearnings, hopes, despairs, drive, and as well as reflection, the capacity to ask questions which are unanswerable about oneself, about one's destiny, about who we meet and at which level we connect, at which level we connect with our awareness of our past, of our awareness of the path through which the people in the field of our professional or curiosity interest have gone through in order to reach possibly some, if not any, answers to their quest. It's about a trip of self-search. And an art form is a mirror of the soul, in all humility and not in narcissism, in the sense that you truly cannot be dishonest. Artfully, yes, you can recreate sarcasm, dishonesty, double entendre, ways of using humor in different levels to suggest things without telling them, of course, and that is what is the spice of life, and sometimes the pain also, because those who receive are not those who emit, and there is a level of cruelty as well as a level of soothing and hopefully of solace ultimately in art. Would it be through the different senses that it approaches us, a perfume, a painting, a moving image, in both without unintended pun means of moving, that moves you as well as moving itself, and the capacity of evocation of what is our inner flame, or what is the flame of somebody with whom we identify as a hero of a fiction or a real hero, and to which extent this appropriation of art form for our lives, psychological nourishment is necessary. I think it depends of the people. Some are more intuitive, some are more reflective, and in fact the balance, or the dosage rather, between the innate and the achieved through education or curiosity. The acquired doesn't replace the innate. It probably echoes it, or perhaps gives it some kind of coating, as if you want to find psychological reassurance through some kind of pseudo-scientific way that your intuition is right, even if you will only know it in the future, which by definition we don't know. We deal with the present, overwhelmed most likely sometimes by the past, but the future seems to be the bet of the soulful bet, like Pascal used to say, le pari de Pascal. But he was doing this for afterlife. But nevertheless, we bet in the hope that with these people we'll reach this future, or in this profession one reaches these or those perhaps unrealistic goals that are set by ourselves, but it's necessary to dream in the sense not of being delusional, but to have something that uplifts us beyond our survival, which is already so hard to achieve physically, physiologically, mentally, and gentle to others while life is not gentle to you. It's a tough thing to be admirative of others in a profession without to feel perhaps less, as often is the case, confident in oneself, could lead to jealousy. If you could have admiration through acceptance of the alterity of the other, doing things that you think you do the best, but in fact you realize they do it better, if not differently, or at least from a different point of view than you considered. And with age, some people become more stiff in their conviction about the ways things are supposed to be done, thought, imagined, dreamed, achieved. And of course, the achievement is palpable by the facts of life, what you have achieved in possessions, in connections with people who brought you to other levels of your own self, but ultimately you navigate through life through a series of accidents of life, which retrospectively seem to look like a line that goes somehow more or less, if not straight, at least towards a goal. Like for atonal music, sometimes we say when it's mildly atonal, we say tonal centered, because we don't know how much this bias towards some direction of hope for life and away from fear from death, or against the fascination of evil and the fascination of jealousy. And so, of course, education, meaning parents' education, not school education. Well, it's rather school instruction and family education sets goals, but your character is innate at birth anyway. So the education can perhaps trait some of the traits, but ultimately the call it talent, gift, or perhaps drive, or something that you cannot not pursue, even if it's against the odds for any logical reason in terms of financial or professional or human. And that leads you to be in distance from those who you love, because it means to you more that self-search or accomplishment. Of course, people who have very strongly received gifts should know that, as my Mademoiselle Boulanger used to tell me when I was a child prodigy, she says, you're not responsible for the gift, but you're responsible for the work. And because of the gift, she almost guilt-tripped me, well, not almost, fully, that it obliges me to give more to the others through the hard work that I would produce in order to merit or justify this gift, which as a child I remember thinking I didn't ask for it. And in turn it separated me from one of my parents because of distance in the way I had to be educated in Paris, and my father worked in Berlin. And as a child, you see the priorities affectively and not only intellectually. Even if you have, through a certain talent of precocity for a certain perhaps domain of art form, like the music, because of the ear and the hearing and the taste developed, and the acquired taste and the innate, again, all these elements are combined and intertwined. You make choices which determine a character, and then the person who educates you at home gives you also the important levels of behaving in society by being tolerant, truly, humble, truly, even if it costs, because it does, not to be entitled, regardless of or not of any innate advantages that you might have received according to some people or not, because all this is subjective. People say, and people say with different points of view of their interest towards this, and then ultimately it's your path of life and how you guide yourself through life, respectful of others, giving to others the best of your experience or for your understanding, trying to help them. In my case, if I can find a fingering that all of a sudden fits in the morphology of a piano student for a given section, it gives the student inevitably a great self-confidence when questioning fully yourself, putting yourself on question, when ephemerally you restart the piece from scratch as a pianist, and it doesn't remain like a painting or so. So yeah, I gave also ideas of elevation of the spirit, of what is a stylistic expression, what is the meaning of a civilizational point of view of where you place the artwork that you're serving, playing about, writing about, or teaching it, and therefore adapting to the psyche and the new eyes of a younger student, in my case as a teacher. And ultimately you realize that the same thing means so many different things to others from your or different generations, and that you will never know the knowledge of it or the truth of it, or whatever you want to call the search for the essence of the meaning of what you're involved in. Is it valuable or not? Is it like a solid science that you can you can connect to old scientific researches in a field and prove them wrong by bringing one that is proven right, and that brings through a different point of view and understanding furthering in the science, with medicine, in every solid science. And then you have also this dimension of inspiration for the musicians, as they call it, or the artists in general, of course, which in fact means to let yourself guide by your intuition, or misguide by your intuition. And that is to be taken in account too. When you deal with art, as I said earlier, I think it is an allegory of human psyche's journey on earth, from theater to writing. Directly the conceptual words and the concepts that they vehicle, and you get to the point where you can read directly and misunderstand or understand another dimension of from the same text. And is there only a correct writing, understanding, and correct analysis? Of course, there are rules and there are laws. Lex sed lex, dura lex, as say the Latins. But the rules are there to be also explained, in the sense that they bring you to further develop your refined thinking of things and ways and means. So it's really the bounds that liberate you once you understand the purpose of them, not as a self-censorship by saying, well, everything was said in art before me, what is for me left to add to it other than some superficiality of my being? I mean, what is the depth or the scope of something I could contribute, if ever, to this suite of artworks for centuries? And probably the self-evaluation is the hardest thing, because it might be either unfairly negative, either overstatedly positive. But who defines the criteria? Trends among art forms, especially art business and critics, and then the business takes account, and people say this film grossed that amount of entrances, and therefore it's a criteria, not necessarily. And perhaps the other option is to say, because it didn't, it's a very intellectual film, therefore it has a value. I think all of the elements have values for those for whom this satisfies their intellectual appetite, their sensual appetite, their senses appetite, their emotional connecting to something, either entertaining, either thought provoking, either whichever media brings you what, and enriches you through exchanges of generations if you're with children of your own, or working in a situation where you see how younger generations look at the way you consider your art. And you realize that you're old-fashioned, in fact, by technicity very easily, but not necessarily by the essence of the message, the narrative storytelling. And then you could say that styles are made like fashions to get out of fashion by essence. Avant-garde is usually dépassé, or in French, for over. It's already past as soon as mentioned. Contemporaries at the same time, the present time. But there are art forms that still awaken a lot of thought-provoking ideas from distant centuries past for us, when we get to be a vibrant antenna to a message that we perceive, or perhaps we are not sure, even without an art historian explaining to you symbolically what are the elements of a given painting that intrigues you, not knowingly really why, but you try to, because in fact when humans are attracted to another human, usually is by curiosity, because something attracts them and they want to know more. Sometimes when you do a biographical essay on some, let's say, author or great artist who's remained famous or infamous, or some people are forgotten, and you bring them back on the map, you realize that you enter in their intimacy, and that feels very uncomfortable. You feel like that's their privacy, and they are, if they were creators of art, or scientists, or they were medical doctors, or they were just, I don't know, priests, or people who served others and helped things advance through selflessness. I mean, at all levels is to respect, that's what I was taught, everybody, for every individuality that they are, and for what they believe they give themselves for the time of earth life that we are allotted. Not, we don't know when and why started and when and how it will end, but in the meantime it feels like when we go through the biographical notes, we try to inevitably, and perhaps it's healthy, but ultimately I think it becomes unhealthy, at least uncomfortable for me, to draw diagonal lines between their personal choices in how they treated or mistreated each other, and how they left us with a universal art form that means to us so much by itself, not because of them, but because we are curious, we want to know more, just like humans. And because in every amorous relationship, intuitively, people who want to be loved tend to not be really honest right away, because they are afraid that the honesty will disarm, or perhaps make the other person turn away. And they only reveal themselves and their true themselves later, which results then in problems, as we can imagine, since beginning of humanity. But in this art of seduction, which is not vain, it is, I think, part of our desire to reach to others by lust or by desire. It's okay, after all, if it's in the sense of the accepted morals, which are important to respect mainly the others. if they reciprocate or not. And if you try to play a game, I remember one of my illustrious colleagues of piano, Professor Shebok, who taught in Bloomington here, used to say, when in a pianist interpretation, you try to convey through the music love, but not dishonest. Don't try to seduce if you don't love. And so, yes, there is a dimension of seduction in any art form that at least catches our attention, our psyche, our emotions, our senses. And of course, we intellectualize it after by studying it, and perhaps then we become specialists of a given niche. And all that leads us to become aware of things that our intuition didn't feed us for, but sort of guided us towards. And then with the acquired taste, we develop a capacity then to, it's like a spider web or arborescence on a tree. We then access to other art forms or other artists who perhaps at the get-go we would have not gone to the film of or the composition of, because we fear this or we fear that, boredom, anger, danger, violence in a film presentation or something. And then this acquired taste leads you to open yourself to, of course, through true tolerance with very strong opinions, because I don't think it's incompatible. It's not a weakness to be tolerant, it's a strength to choose so, because then you can receive, but with your character and with your personality, you filter what you receive, and then you don't have to make any choices of abnegation or sans-do, and I think they regret it. Perhaps to a certain extent is necessary, but it's difficult to define for each individual person at which level, until when they have to keep that going on until they touch the truth of the things, and then they are in unison with each other or they are not. But this dissonance between the appearing and the being, it is a necessary approach, but I think one can arguably also say that therefore acting is lying, but by doing so we have a form as people who watch the acting of an actor. We could hear or read the text that they are, the lines that they're saying, but they incarnate it, the character, they become it, and therefore we enter in a disbelief. And then we have the rupture of disbelief, and we start believing that this is really the essence of art, the form of life through somebody who is pretending it, not lying, but pretending, though we assume that we also know they pretend. So there is no false expectations. You don't assume they talk to you individually in the theater hall, and and you don't believe that all what happens in their characters' story narration is happening to them really, because then it does not exist. It's not possible. They don't die, they don't love, they just pretend to die, they pretend to love. But at some level, that pretending is so believable because they play not, of course, there are famous theater techniques about that, about how you, and that technique in music is the same thing, to express the art as fluently as you want it to flow from you, through you, from the music that you received from a notated device into a live audience, and you have the responsibility of how you frame it, shape it, present it, it's not about being pedagogical, but I think it's also to involve yourself. After all, I don't believe that interpretation by essence is an overstepping, like Ravel used to think about his works, only to be played, not to be interpreted, therefore translated. And that is something that can be argued a long time about at which level do we appropriate something where we allow, for instance, in music, a rubato, and how tasteful is it, or is it even acceptable, and in which style and how much? Well, nobody really agrees. And it's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing, because if you depend on the judgment of others for an advancement professionally, then you tend to shut down your personal involvement and just let the music itself as a truly, all artists in terms of their technique for their art form are craftsmen. And this craftsmanship brings you the capacity to express something that is soulful and transcendent. The one feeds the other. And but it's given to humans to be uplifted, to think of eternity, to think of afterlife, to either because they fear, either because they accept, through faith, through philosophy, or through self conviction. Regardless, we navigate this uncharted territory with lots of examples of trillions of people on earth before us, but they aren't too alike in the paths in question on life. Of course, they are similar, different streams, and we can say I'll fit in this and through the army, or through the I don't know, lawyers or doctors, or whatever we do, we remain individually involved in it, ethically and aesthetically. How we behave humanly with others is also a lot to do with who we are. And how some artists behave or misbehave humanly but create great art, it doesn't excuse them. As a matter of fact, I think it needs just to healthily separate the two when we study them or want to play or present their artwork. And if the communality between the choices of being of the artist and their life and with their work match, then be it. That's wonderful. It's almost an osmosis in heaven. But humans are not meant to be necessarily virtuous at all levels, other than the absolute respect that they should have for each other, for each other's acceptance of each other or rejection of each other. As painful as it is, it's necessary to understand. And I find the same thing because most of the classical music is based with dead authors, although we have live authors, but nevertheless it's not the greatest percentage in the classical music transmission or performance or teaching, therefore, of the essence of what they would have thought. And perhaps we misunderstand them or misguess them in their intent through the filter of their notation, and we try to decipher, like you do for an ancient language, through a tablet and try to understand how this works or that. It's a little bit of a archaeologist, and of course we have a lot of, in music, musicologists who already have harvested the terrain before we arrive in the piece, which already existed before us and will exist after us for the people to play it. But it means to us something so personal that connects to our own culture and own education and own instruction and how we behave in the piece. And is it because of our character, which is innate, if we are more fiery or more dreamy? Or is it because we adapt to become like the actors? When we play a style, we define it so that we have a soundscape frame within which we develop a very rich level of subtle nuancing. Acoustics, instrumental projection, expectation from audiences which are today alive, and we have already recordings from almost a century ago, if not more, that give us to understand how people play genuinely with conviction and inspiration in a ways that today people wouldn't do, either because they think it's silly for some, in private perhaps rather than in public, or because it's not the trend, or because all causes. But I think that we have at least this, unlike in the past, we have this sort of archive of artists serving the art, which we, if we are involved in music, we are in to serve honestly. So that therefore we have to still define what it means to us to play it without to overwhelm the art narration of the author's point of view, with our appropriation of it, which could overwhelm it or just state it. And so there are different schools of thought between let it be or involve yourself in order to bring the meaning to you of what you do with it or through it, or what it means to you to do it, in order to be convincing, because you're convinced when you play for an audience who knows or doesn't know the piece. If they do, they'll be critical because they already have an awareness and perhaps preferences if they can or can't do it, but preferred by others who do it differently. And those who don't, then they receive it as a narrative that is their first access to it through you, if they don't have the musical knowledge to read music. So it's not an alphabetization that you do as a performer, but to a certain extent, you have that responsibility towards the work. And you feel, because you spend so much time practicing it, polishing it, hopping it, imagining it, organizing it, it takes so long time between the details and the whole, and then the experience of it, until you find the beginning of the understanding after you learned it, how it's going to live with you artistically through even your life, and how it evolves with how many different aspects of it you discover in a given author's text, that you discovered at certain level, and you discover other dimensions to it. And it's necessary to continue always that journey. Because I think, therefore, that art form is a mirror of our psyche and experience of being alive, with the unconsciousness, because under age 4 or so we don't remember, but if we did, who knows what it would have been then to carry as a memory. This incredible development of the within the womb, and then going into almost age, 15, and then after that slows down progressively as you age. But so we have some people manage to have some kind of mediumnic awareness of who they were perhaps before, or how it was at another dimension of space and time. These are very complex things that I cannot even describe myself, but I can understand that some people might be able to perceive some vibrations of sorts, like I do with music pitches, intuitively. Again, it's a very important word, I guess. And the art form is a way to sublime our even weaknesses as humans through demonstrating it either to laugh of ourselves or at ourselves, or to reflect upon ourselves individually or as a group or a generation or a profession. Or that's why humor is probably the key that allows to survive this angst. But it's a double-edged sword. It can be cruel as well, humor, but it's revealing, and it also tests the humility when you question yourself to the depth of what you consider your honesty.